Well, you see, my academic background is really in languages and English, originally English literature. And since translation is important in all these three, I came naturally to translation that way. I've also always been attracted by translation, as I've had to use it both orally, I'm using translation in its generic sense, and in writing. Translation, however, is particularly concerned with writing, and I think that I write more naturally than I speak. That may surprise you, but I think translation and writing are closer to thought, thinking, than speaking. Well, to me, and I emphasize only to me, the essence of translation is transferring the full meaning of a text from one language to another language for a similar audience, readership rather. In some cases, however, translation can be any kind of transfer of meaning between languages, and the niceties of the detail may not be all that important. Furthermore, in the case of multi-translation, it becomes much more general. So it depends what the purpose of the translation is. But I go back to my original definition as the essence of translation. Translation was only seen as a subset of linguistics, I would say, by certain writers such as Snyder and Catford, and that's therefore only English, perhaps Moonan too. I'm going back therefore to years from 40 to 50, the 40s to the 50s, for a fairly short period. No, my aim wasn't to establish a new trend in translation studies. My aim was to establish some kind of agreement about this essence of translation. In that I have signally failed, but also to use translation studies as a frame of reference, because translations seem to me to be so shoddily done, particularly in serious fields like translation of novels, where the so-called free translation seemed to me a betrayal of what the author was trying to say. That's how I see translation, what I call translation theories and others call translation studies or translatology, or with one or two more, as the essence of translation. As the essence of translation theory, as a frame of reference, something that somebody can refer to and get help in translating, and that's why the examples are so essential, but not as something canonical or mandatory or anything like that. It's something that's useful. It seems to me the whole point of producing any theories of translation and as I see it, you need separate theories for translation and metaphor, or neologisms, grammatical constructions and so on. All these require some kind of help or method or guidance, whatever you like to call it. And there's a great lack of agreement on it, and other people write about translation, do it in a purely descriptive spirit, and accuse people like me of being prescriptive, which I deny, but in their case there are no values in translation at all. There being such a obvious distinction between what I call literary and non-literary translation, I would say that in non-literary translation, which might be specialized translation, technical translation, information translation, there's you have a wide variety of choices, and particularly now when the translation in so many cases is multi-translation. By that I mean a single text being translated into more than one language. Literary translation, the training is there's so much more to do. I think there could be, on the other hand, many common courses. Writing well is essential, as essential, and in my view, probably nobody else's, in non-literary as in literary translation. And here there could be a kind of common course. A translation in metaphor in literary translation, one normally thinks, or hopefully, of original metaphors, how to deal with them, whilst in non-literary translators you would want plenty of practice in standard metaphors and cliché metaphors and how to avoid them. And padding is an enormous problem in non-literary texts, but you wouldn't have a separate kind of course on that in training literary translators. Good writing is I'll do it a different way, how somebody who has a sharp mind is reflected on paper. In other words, the reflection of often sharp distinctions in an agreeable and euphonious manner, whether it's literary or non-literary, that is, it must sound well, and certainly it must read fluently. The word smoothly I mistrust, because I don't like smooth people, or maybe that's one reason. So, but of course, if you can say proper words in proper places, is Jonathan Swift's brief definition of good writing, or Walter Benjamin, the dress fitting tightly, rather sexy, over the body, that being a metaphor to describe good writing. I'm saying that acronyms, as long as they are explained for the first time and a reasonable amount of repetition within the text, I think they're indispensable. You can't go on saying the thing over and over again. What I dislike is acronym being used purely for prestige, which is common in many advertisements, many for many products. So you go on using the acronym until everyone accepts them. And whether they're obscure or not will depend partly whether you explain them the first time, and partly whether your readership is bright enough to remember. Often they're not. In the high technology and fast changing society where we live, be careful, I don't like that much, of course they are convenient lexical items. I'm never challenger, and I've written a lot about acronyms, and not always to condemn. Well, essentially, in the way that I have mentioned, that is, for literary texts, you think of original metaphors and the effect they have, their connotations, and normally you translate them what I call straight, although there's a risk that the readership won't understand them. So you perhaps explain them in a note, as you often do in Shakespeare. Non-literary metaphors, you have non-literary metaphors, you have all kinds of cliches, and it's often kinder to eliminate the cliches or tidy them up a bit so that they have more effect on the readership. You may remember that the Israeli translation theorist Menachem Dagut wouldn't recognize the standard metaphors as metaphors at all. He called them something else. He was mainly concerned with literary metaphors. I think that was a bit misleading, but it was a brilliant article and justified. I usually say he must be a temporary expert. Normally the translator must understand the text sometimes in quite general terms, but still must know what is going on, must look up all these words, and again, normally what happens is that the translator is well read in his specialism, if he claims in that. Whether this is necessary or not, I don't know. I often quoted the fact that I once translated a bit of advanced mathematics without understanding a word of what the text was about, and then consulting and being told that brilliant translation, because the words happen to be the same. But of course that's not what happens often, because whilst the words may be Greek, what I call Greco-Latin, the meaning of such words may be very different, or they may have 2 or 3 meanings, technical words, in another language. So my short answer is, as I say, that a temporary expert in the sense of understanding what he's translating. Yeah, very much so. Growing all the time. You can tell that by metaphors by translate into and translate as, which are fairly recent metaphors, commonly used, meaning transferring of meaning. You can see it by the new techniques, the new modes of translation, such as subtitling and multi-translation, which is now a huge business that tends to dominate non-literary translation. You can see it in the increase in nation states and international organizations. So it is this growth it won't stop.